What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Gen Z Money Podcast, where we turn financial peace to your reality. I'm your host, James Bowman, and today's guest we had on Jared, and me and Jared had such an awesome conversation, guys. I mean, you will hear from his story how he went from being the normal, everyday average Joe, making the same mistakes that tons of different people make, how he's turned into creating hundreds of $1,000s in net worth and striving to become a millionaire in what I would say is one of the simplest ways possible. I mean, this interview was amazing, and I really think a lot of you guys are going to be able to relate, because guess what? His wife is a teacher and he's in the automotive industry, and he's not the CEO of, Toyota, or he doesn't own 10 dealerships. He's just an average person like you and I. So I really hope you guys enjoy. He throws out so many good resources and so many different tips and investment vehicles. And this was just an awesome show, guys. I really hope that you guys get a lot of value out of it. But without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and get right into the interview. What's going on, Jared? Welcome to the Gen Z Money Podcast. How you doing today, man?
Hey, doing good, James. It's good to be here, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on. I mean, I relate. I follow you on Twitter, and I relate to a whole lot of your posting, because I hope you don't take this offensive, but you're kind of like the average Joe investor, like I am, right? We aren't, these stock market billionaires you see on TV picking stocks and stuff like that. We're kind of just going through life and building wealth over time. So that's why I wanted to bring you on and just talk through your story and, have you give some advice to the listeners of the podcast on how they can replicate what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I take that as a compliment, actually, because that lets me know that I'm doing my job right, because that's exactly what I am. I'm just an average person, just like a lot of people, and I'm just trying to share a message that I needed to hear when I was 20 something years old, and which I'm 34 now, and a little bit older than some of my people that follow my Twitter. And I think that's why I resonate so well with them, is because I'm spreading hope, and I'm spreading a message that anybody can start investing, anybody can get control of their finances, anybody can pay off their debt. It's just possible with a plan and just a little bit of effort and hard work. And that's what I'm all about. So I'm glad you follow along and that you find some value in it.
Yeah. And something very important you just said, right, is spreading the hope that you can do it, I can do it, anyone can do it. I think that is probably the single most biggest factor when it comes to building wealth, is believing that it's possible and you can do it. It's not just for the lottery winners.
That's right. Yeah. And because, people see, quote unquote millionaires on TV or billionaires, and automatically they think, well, there's no way that can be me. Well, maybe the billionaires, that's a completely different level, but the millionaires, the media loves to put millionaires almost on the same kind of pedestal as these billionaires, which we know that a million is just, someone with $1 million net worth, right? And so I like to discuss that, and it doesn't always mean that they've got fancy cars and big houses and just living a life of luxury, because most millionaires are just simple people like you and me. I mean, there's a guy that lives right down the road here from me that is what you would define as a millionaire next door, but you would not be able to tell that just by looking at him, just because he's a normal guy. His kids go to the same school as mine. He wears just regular clothes, just a very, very simple guy. And he did that just by simple things, and starting investing early and sticking with it. And so I like to use his story a lot as an example. But yeah, it's just all things that people can do, but you just have to have a plan and stick with it. And oftentimes that plan is starting early, and that's why I like to talk about starting investing as early as possible, so you can get your assets time to grow.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. So let's dive into your story, right? Let's go back to little Jared growing up, right? How was money talked about and viewed in your household as you grew up?
Yeah, so going back when I was just a little boy, money was not really discussed in our family. Um, and I didn't realize this until many years later. But my family actually had a problem with debt when I was a kid, and it was something that my mom and dad didn't discuss much with me and my brother. I've got a younger brother; he's 4 years younger than me. But it was almost like they were shielding us from that because they were going through some pretty difficult times. Years later, when we were adults, we discovered this, and so I commend them for essentially shielding us from that when we were younger, so we could just be a kid, and not have to worry about mom and dad struggling with money and all that. So, but because of that, we didn't really discuss money much. The extent of the money conversation with us was, okay, we go to church and we give, you know, that was really it. We give some of our money to the church, and beyond that, we just live as cheaply as we possibly can, and uh, and then that's it. We always bought from, we went to the value grocery store. We didn't really go out to eat much. When we did, it was kind of a big deal. Um, so it was very much a topic that was kind of hush hush. And when we got older, old enough to drive and that sort of thing and make our own money with a job, my dad taught me how to balance a checkbook. He opened a checking account for me. And after that, that was it. I went to college, and it was kind of left on my own as far as money goes. There was no further guidance beyond that. There was a little talk about insurance and that sort of thing, because when I bought my truck, got truck insurance and that sort of stuff. But there was no talk about investing. There was no talk about um, putting money into an IRA or a Roth IRA, and all of that kind of stuff was just stuff that my parents didn't really do, and so therefore they didn't share that with me, just because they didn't really know much about it either, right? So I mean, they're not gonna talk about it if they don't know about it. So, and then also too, there was a little bit of a victim mentality from the people that was around me, right? So it was investing and being wealthy was not for me; it was for those other people. That was the prevailing mindset with people that I grew up, not necessarily my family, but just people that I grew up around, and that kind of went into my mind as I got older, and it took a long time to tear down those mindsets, as I got older. But thankfully, I found some resources later on in my life, and well into my adult life, that showed me that those mindsets are poisonous, and that they can really lead to uh, just a generation of victims, right? And some of those were justified, but for the most part, it was just a lot of whining, and a lot of it's not for us, it's for other people. So yeah, that's pretty much my story in a nutshell. Not really discussed much when we were growing up. And a lot of this stuff that I talk about now on my Twitter, like you mentioned, is things that I learned just 10 plus odd years ago. I mean, when I was 20 years old coming into college, all this stuff was new to me. I had no clue. So I mean, I'm relatively new, just like most other people. I've just been doing it just a little bit longer.
Gotcha. Well, let me ask you something going back a little bit, because I think it is a very delicate topic when it comes to expressing financial concerns with children, because as you stated, you have to let children be children, and so
Hmm.
they shouldn't have to go to school and think about like, oh God, mommy and daddy are in debt, blah, and things like that. But on the other hand of that, when you don't discuss the problems that you're having with your children, it makes it a lot easier for them to fall down the same path you did because you made these mistakes. They were never exposed to the mistakes, so they don't even realize they are mistakes. They think
Right.
it's normal, right? So when all your parents have had is car payments all their life, when you grow up, you view that as normal. Uh,
Hmm.
so do you think, and you don't have to have an answer to this question, but like I said, it's a very delicate balance. Do you think it did more positive that they did not share their mistakes with you as you were growing up, or do you think it had more of a negative outcome?
Man, that's a great question. I think that honestly, looking back, like taking the time to reflect back on that, I feel like that it did honestly probably a little more harm just simply because I started falling into the same things that they were falling into when I got older. And if they had taken the time to share what was going on in their life, then as I got older, then I would have understand, hey, I shouldn't open this credit card right now because this is the same thing that hurt mom and dad, all these years back. So yeah, I think it kind of did in a way. I've never had that asked to me like that before, but just thinking about it, that's a good point. Because we financed cars just like they did. We had three credit cards. I'm sure we'll get into that about the debt here in a moment. But we had three credit cards. We were just spending more money than we were making, honestly, and that was all the same things that my parents were doing when we were kids. So yeah, and it has to be age appropriate, right?
Mhm.
When this was going on, we were relatively young, like 8, 9, 10, something like that. So yeah, I believe they could have at least conveyed to us that, hey, there's something going on here in an age appropriate way. And then as we got older, uh, shared with us exactly what not to do, because they didn't tell me when we got older to avoid credit cards, to avoid uh, getting car loans. They didn't share it. They didn't share all the things to not do with what they did. But uh, I guess they just were thinking that, hey, this was the mistake that we made, and we're going to fix it, uh, and just kind of hopefully share what we would have done with our kids later, because but that conversation was never had with us. So I don't know, they may have had the intentions to later, but they never did. So
Gotcha. Well, like I said, like you just alluded to, um, too much of it can be bad, right? If
mm,
your child goes to school thinking, "Oh, I don't know if we're going to have dinner tonight," because of this credit card debt, that's a much different thing to say, "Hey, look, Jared, next week we are eating at home all week because we have this credit card to pay off that we already spent." And so I think coming at it in the appropriate way is probably the hardest part of that, and not many people have the tools to do that.
yeah,
So
and now as a parent, I fully understand that because it is difficult. My son, I've got two boys, 7 and 2, and with our 7-year-old, we're trying to work with some age appropriate money topics with him. And in a way, I feel like he's just a little too young for some things, but he can be shown, how to save money, working around the house, and doing little odd jobs, that sort of thing. But when it comes to debt, that's a completely different, way over his head, and that's kind of where I was at. Where they were at, rather, when we were in debt. So yeah, that I could feel that's a little difficult to conversation to have with a 7-year-old. But when we was growing up, I didn't want to make it sound like we were struggling to have our next meal. It wasn't that bad or anything. Um, but it was definitely some credit card debt going on. And so, but they did a good job navigating that, because they're debt free now, and they're doing really well for themselves. So,
Well, that's good to hear at the end of the story. Like,
oh
they
yeah.
did come out the other end, but of course, how they did that, I'm sure we can get into a little bit later. So let's go ahead and start tracking through, because on your Twitter, you put out that you ended up getting out of $30,000 in debt. So I kind of want to walk through the process on how was that debt accumulated as you grew up, because you talked about you went to college. So how did that come about?
Yeah. So after I graduated college, I immediately got a job in the automotive industry, and where I still work at now. I work at a Toyota facility here which I'm in Alabama now, but in Mississippi, right across the border here. And I proposed to my wife not long after I got this job, and there was no debt at this point. But it wasn't until we got married and started living together is when we started accumulating debt, and it was very slow. We got one credit card and started accumulating debt with just one credit card that was a $500 credit limit, and that was actually how I built some credit. Was with this one credit card. It was a bank credit card, $500 credit limit, and we actually forgot to pay 1 month, and so it was like $200 or something like that, and it lapsed over, and we paid some interest on it, and but beyond that, we started getting more credit cards. Like, we finally was able to get that credit card that had the $5,000 limit instead of five. And, we thought that was a victory. Like, we was doing something good, that we qualified for the $5,000 limit. So all told, we had about 3 credit cards, I believe, and we financed a car. And we also, I'm kind of going through a lot of time here, but within the span of 5 years after we got married, we bought a house, we had a car, we had 3 credit cards that we were paying, but sometimes getting behind on. And also, with this new house, you have all the other expenses that come with it, and you're just slowly adding on. So by the time we bought our house, we had roughly 22 and some change, and that's including the car. But the day that it kind of all came to a head was the day that we came home, and I believe we had been out to eat. We love going out to eat, and we did a lot of it back in the day. And what I'm speaking about here is we were spending money just left and right. And so came home one night after having gone to eat, and we found in our bedroom a little termite in our bedroom. And didn't really think much about it. And we started looking around where that termite was, and that there was a little hole in the wall. And we noticed termites coming in and out of that hole. And which, here in the South, that's a big problem that we have is termites. And so there's 2 types of houses in the South. There's a house that has termites, and there's a house that's about to get termites. Thing down here. So, but anyway, yeah. So we discovered we had termites, which was devastating, because that's a very, very expensive repair. And so we had the pest control people come out, and they assessed the situation, and discovered that one whole wall of one of our exterior wall was infested with termites. So that cost to the tune of about $5,000, $6,000 for repair, all told. And of course, we didn't have the money to pay for it. So there was a finance option through the pest control company. And so we took that option and just added to our debt even more. So a few days later, I started looking at our bank website, and I started reflecting back on the termites and everything else that we had going on. And I was like, man, we are in quite a bit of debt, and relative to our income at the time, it was a lot of debt. About $30,000 is what it all totaled up to be at the end of the day, and that's including the car, credit cards, and the termites included. So that was our wake up moment, I guess you could say. I've talked about this a lot before. That was the line in the sand, you could call it. That was the moment that we decided that we were tired of going this route, and we knew we needed to make a change. And oftentimes, people that I've talked to, they've had similar experiences where they've been going down this road with their money and perceived it as normal, quote unquote normal. And then they realize that there's got to be a better way. And what you're doing is not working and you need to make a change. Well, that was the point for us. So when we reached that point, we didn't really know exactly what to do, but we knew that we needed to at least track what we were spending. So I'm sure you're familiar with Dave Ramsey and his program. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but basically we started his program and read his book. And I would say within a year, I'm going to fast forward a year after that, we paid off our debt. It may have been a little beyond a year, like maybe a year and a half, but it's been a little while now. So, but his program works. I'm just going to say if you stick with it, it works, and it worked for us. But the key was making a budget. So going back to that, when we realized that we needed to make a change, the budget was the first thing that we did. We sat down and actually wrote it down on paper, everything that we spend. All of our bills was what we started with, and all the things that we had income wise. And we realized at that moment that we were spending way more than we were bringing in. And so, and also too, I mentioned that we like to go out and eat a lot. Well, that was when we tallied up all the restaurants for that month, and we realized that we had spent over $1,000 eating out, which is just absolutely insane when you sit back and think about that. So we knew where the areas of opportunity were. We just needed to make a plan and execute it. And throughout the oncoming months after that, we got on this budget and we started tightening the belt, and we started allocating those extra funds to our debt. And we started with the smallest debt, and we just did the debt snowball all the way down until we paid it all off. And but the main thing there is the budget. The budget was absolutely critical for us, because without that, we wouldn't know where we needed to start or what we needed to cut back on, because it was all about finding extra cash to throw to the debt. So for anybody that's in debt, I love the debt snowball, and I would recommend it to anybody, and it certainly worked for us.
Gotcha. So it sounds as though, because you're naming off a bunch of things that aren't completely abnormal. So first of all, you made it all the way through college with no student loan debt.
That is correct. Yes. My parent, I went to a community college, Alabama, which, is a 2-year that's very, or more, less expensive. And so, yes, I did not have any student loan debt. That was all cash flowed. And my wife did not have any student loan debt either. She's a school teacher, and her parents were gracious enough to pay for her college, so that we were very, very fortunate in that regard. So yeah, we did not have any student loan debt.
Gotcha. And then, so you have a car loan, which is it's very typical. That's nothing out of the blue. And then you have these 3 credit cards. One of the questions I was going to ask you was, what were you using these credit cards for? Were you going out and buying new TVs? But then you talked about how once you did a budget, you realized you were operating at a deficit every single month. So it kind of tells me that deficit was just going on those credit cards, whether it was eating out or making purchases you didn't need. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. So that was basically what we were using, is we were just basically using it to extend our month, right? We were running out of money at the end of the month, and we were just buying things. Like, we put groceries on there. We would put we would put, like, I think we bought a washing machine one time. It was on a Lowe's credit card. We had a Lowe's card, and there was one time that there was some kind of gift that I was going to buy my wife at a Macy's, I believe. And no, it wasn't Macy's, it was Belk. And I bought this gift and I signed up for a credit card because I was eligible for 10% off. And so I signed up for that debt. So yeah, it was just a lot of random things. And you're right, it was nothing out of the ordinary. It was just all normal stuff. But it accumulated, and it kind of got out of hand. So, but yeah, that was what we were using them for. Just normal stuff, not really anything out of the ordinary.
Gotcha. And so you look up after this termite issue comes up, and you realize, okay, something needs to change. You find Dave Ramsey and his plan. And very quickly, I'm just going to go over his first step is to save $1,000. The next step is to pay off your debt using the debt snowball, which means you list out all of your debts, smallest balance to largest balance, regardless of the interest rate. You make minimum payments on every single debt, and you throw all excess income at the smallest debt until it is eliminated. Then you snowball all of that up to the next smallest debt until that's eliminated, so on until the debt's complete. So I assume you get through these first two steps in a year to a year and a half, which is that's a lot of money. That's, if we just say over 18 months, that's over $2,000 a month going towards paying off these debts. After that, what was the steps you take? So you finally get debt free. And I know the listeners may be thinking like, okay, wait a minute, that's a big step. And that's very hard to do. But once you start doing it, it kind of takes care of itself. So once this debt's finally paid off, what step do you go to next to now start building your net worth?
Yeah. So when we paid off the debt, and the last debt that we had was the car. Once we paid that off, we moved on to building our full emergency fund, which honestly, that was very hard. The emergency portion was for us anyway, it was difficult, and just mainly because we had just went through that journey of paying off our debt, and we had no debt at that point except for our home mortgage. We still had our home, but that's not included as being in debt in the debt snowball as far as his program is concerned. But we knew we had to build up this emergency fund, so we were so pumped to go ahead and start investing. But we knew we had to build this emergency fund up. So just mentally, that was difficult because we were building up all of this money, and we had to put off our investing until then. So we were super aggressive with that. And us personally, we felt comfortable with a 3-month emergency fund. So our fund now, and even back then, was just 3 months of expenses. And that's a debate that I've had on Twitter a lot. I actually posted something yesterday about emergency funds, and there was a lot of people posting about their personal opinions and all that, which is fine. But we simply keep ours in a savings account, 3 months of expenses, and we just think about, okay, if we lost both of our jobs, how much would it cost to sustain this household for 3 months? And that's what we did.
Okay, well, before you go any further, I kind of want you to just give your opinion on how did you choose? Because personally, my wife and I have a 6-month emergency fund. Okay. Why did you pick 3 months? And it's just to satisfy my curiosity, because I love to hear the thought behind it.
Yeah, no problem. So the reason why we're comfortable with 3 months is because, my wife's a teacher, right? I mentioned that earlier. And her job is, for the most part, safe. I mean, because she just recently got tenured, which means that she essentially can't be fired. I mean, she can be fired if she does something horrible, but for the most part, she's there for the most part. So her side of the equation is very, very safe. I know there's no absolutes and anything can happen, but that side is good. And my side, there's been some bumpy waters here lately with COVID. but we feel like that my job is pretty safe as well. So because of that, we feel comfortable with being on the 3 month side of the equation. And also too, we have always make sure that our household spending, or I said household, but mainly the expenses that with our home is always under 25% of our monthly income. So our home payment and our bills is always we try to keep it around 25% of our monthly income. And so basically what I'm getting at is we keep things pretty inexpensive on just the operating end of our household. And, we don't have any debt or anything like that right now. So if we were to get in a situation where we did lose, like one of us lost our jobs, we could essentially cash flow through a lot of this issue, and we would tighten up the belt even more, right? And so one of the things that we said is, okay, it was almost like we had a battle plan. Like, okay, if you lost your job, what would we do? Okay, first we would cut Netflix out. We would cut this subscription out. We'd cut Disney Plus. We would extrapolate as much as we could before we tapped into the emergency fund. Because let's face it, I know anyway, we subscribe to Netflix and all the, we've had a couple of subscriptions. We don't have too much crazy stuff, but we could potentially get 200 extra bucks. It's probably not that high, but you get what I'm saying. We could tap into some things like that quickly. We could tighten up the food budget a little bit. We could go rice and beans if we wanted to. We could dial back on a little bit of the giving that we do. We give 10% of our income at our church, and a little extra stuff beyond that. So if things really got in a bad situation, we could absorb a little bit of what we're spending now and allocate it into other things before we tapped into our emergency fund. So I think that's why we feel comfortable with going 3 months rather than 6, just because we've discussed what we would do in that situation where one of our incomes was lost, and the ways that we could get creative with our budget before tapping into that. I hope that makes sense. But
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you're living on 25% of your total income, that means you essentially have a savings rate of 75%. And when you put it like that, I mean, it's really hard to go wrong.
Yeah, too, and I didn't mention that, but we could stop investing too, right? All of the money that we have going toward our investments, we could stop that, and we could use that to just live on if we got in a situation where we had to. So, and during COVID, when everything's locked down, that's what we kind of had to do that. I mean, we were still we were still getting paid, fortunately, because when it got bad, when COVID first hit in early 2020, they shut down our plant. And so, I was still getting paid, but I wasn't getting paid overtime. And I'm used to making overtime. I was naturally in automotive, we make a lot of overtime. And so when you're just going 8 hours every day, 40-hour week, that takes a lot of your income out. So we had to kind of tighten the belt up a little bit during COVID. And so, yeah, we would definitely revert to that again if we had to. And so that's why, and this is fluctuates too month to month, because our income is very variable. Mine is anyway, my wife's salary, but I've got a variable income. So sometimes we're able to invest more, sometimes not. So it just depends on how much really I'm making, honestly, with what our monthly budget is.
Gotcha. Okay, so you complete this emergency fund of 3 months of expenses. What was your plan going forward from there? I know Dave Ramsey, of course, he has his steps where, you're saving for your you're saving for retirement, you're saving for your children's education, and you're paying off the house early. Did you deviate from that path at all?
So starting off, we did everything to a T. Like we even stopped investing into our 401ks when we were building up our emergency fund, right? Because he teaches stop all investing, pay off your debt, and then build your emergency fund, and then after that start investing. So we followed it, I mean, to a T up to that point. And people thought I was crazy at work because I stopped investing in my 401k. And looking back now, just in retrospect, that was a little over the top. But thankfully it wasn't too long. It was maybe 3 or 4 months of stopping investing to build up the emergency fund. But yeah, we went from there, built the emergency fund, and then we started, we opened up a 529 for my son's account. And, at that time we only had one son. So I opened up the account for him, started investing 15% of our income. And I was throwing extra on the house. And so, yeah, we did it absolutely to a T. But I didn't mention earlier, but throughout our journey here in the last 10 years, we've bought 3 houses and sold 2. So we've moved to Mississippi. When I first got my job, or when we first got married, we moved to Mississippi. And then we moved back to Alabama about 3 years later, just to get closer to home. But we were still about 45 minutes away from our family. But just recently, we moved back to our original hometown where we're at today. And so throughout all of that, we maintained this program, but we've changed a few things. So like right now, I no longer put any extra money toward the home principal. And for a couple of reasons. One is I listened to a podcast that just absolutely changed my mindset on this. And so this is why I absolutely love podcasts, and I love supporting podcasts, is just because there's you can glean a lot of information from them, and they've helped me on my journey. But the one podcast that I learned this from was from the Money Guy show with Brian Preston. I don't know if have you ever heard of him?
I have not.
Yeah. I strongly recommend him, by the way. But I heard on his podcast that if you are super young and you're paying down your mortgage, you are betting that the best that you can do with your money right now is get the return that's on your mortgage, which for us it was 4%. And so, I'm 34 now. My wife's 34. We're still young. And our money is still very powerful. Our dollars has a lot of potential to make income, not as much now as we were in our 20s, but the potential to turn that dollar into to even more dollars in retirement is still very high. So when I was throwing that money to pay off my home, I was essentially saying that I can't get better returns in the market right now than 4%, which, at that time the market was booming. And this is like 2019, 2018, something like that. So that's when I stopped paying extra on my house, and I just started throwing extra at my investing. And I understand that a lot of people don't want to do that, and that's fine. I want to have a paid off mortgage one day myself, and I know I will. But I'm just building up the foundation right now. I'm putting basically as much as I possibly can in index funds through my Roth IRA and my brokerage account that we have. So that's why we kind of deviated from his program beyond that point. And he talks about mutual funds, and he never gives specific mutual fund examples, but the ones that he's recommended in the past tend to be very high expense ratios. And so I invest in a lot of low cost, some zero index funds. So that's where we deviate from his program now. He's the best at helping you get out of debt. But when it comes to investing, honestly, you can find maybe a little better advice. I'm not saying his advice is horrible, but you can get some better advice in that way. So
yeah, and I just want to be very clear. It doesn't sound like you're bashing Dave Ramsey.
No.
He's taught you a lot, and he's taken you far. And I don't want to sound like I'm bashing Dave Ramsey, because he has taught me more about budgeting, saving, and investing than anyone else has, even though we do not agree with every single thing he teaches down to the T, does not mean either of us aren't huge fans of his, and both of us aren't very appreciative of what he's done over the last 30 years.
100%.
But I do want to I want to point a couple things out. So it sounds like you're investing more than 15% into retirement as a whole.
That's
Is that right? Okay, so that's one thing you're deviating from his plan. Real quick, you mentioned a 529 plan, and I just want to explain that really quick for the listeners who do not know. A 529 is essentially a tax-advantaged account that can be used for educational purposes. Mainly, people open them up for their children, and that way they have funds that they can put in money. It can grow tax deferred, and if it's used for educational expenses, then the profit that you take out is tax free. And it's got a bunch of great great benefits. So I just wanted to point that out. And then, so you mentioned your Roth, you're putting that into index funds. So why did you choose index funds over picking your own stocks?
Yeah, so starting off, that's what I did. I started off picking my own individual stocks when we paid off the debt and we started investing. That's what we did. I mean, I had my 401k through my work, which was through some target date retirement funds. But beyond that, I was picking my own stocks, and I was doing a horrible job with it too. I didn't know what I was doing. I was buying just anything that I could do any kind of research on. I would read these random Yahoo Finance articles. I would try to time these new stocks coming in, and I lost some money, just to be honest with you, on that. Luckily, it wasn't a whole lot of money, but it was enough to make me realize that, hey, there's got to be a better way to invest than just buying a bunch of random stocks. So at that point is when I discovered index funds, and which I knew about mutual funds with Dave Ramsey, and but that's when I found out that they were pretty high fee. And I knew that over a course of 30, 40 years, those fees were going to add up, and I wouldn't have as much in retirement as I would if I were to find some very low fee funds. So I was finding all these very high fee funds. I knew that individual stock wasn't for me because, I mean, there's people that do really well doing individual stocks, but it's just not for me. I discovered that very early on. So I started digging, and it was at this time that I found Money Twitter. And it was kind of a godsend, honestly, because at that point is when I discovered index funds, accounts like the Wealth Dad, Budget Dog, all those guys that are talking about index funds all the time, and picked up a few ebooks and learned, the ins and outs about index funds, and discovered that you can get started investing in a Fidelity S&P 500 index fund for zero, or well, actually it's not zero, it's like 0.3% expense ratio and zero minimums. So that means that I can get started investing with a little as $100, whatever you got. So that's what I started doing. And the timing here is roughly about 2019 coming into the pandemic in 2020. We were already out of debt. We were trying to discover this whole investing world. And I had a Roth IRA opened up, but it was in these high fee funds, and it was through E-Trade. But my 401k is through Fidelity, and I wanted to open up a Roth through Fidelity just so I can keep everything all in one place. So I rolled over my old 401k that I had with E-Trade into Fidelity, and I just threw it all into an S&P 500 index fund. And essentially I haven't looked back yet. So I can dive into a little bit about what I'm invested in if you want to do that. I don't know if you want to get into that.
Yeah, I do. I want to cover a couple things before we do that, though.
Okay.
So first of all, I want to say, guys, we're talking about a lot of Dave Ramsey, and you mentioned the Money Guy show. I'm going to link all of those in the show notes below that you guys can check it out if you want to. With that being said, I do want to take a couple steps back talking about paying off your mortgage early, because I think that it's something that is it's a very diverse topic. There's some people on the left and some people on the right, and I really don't think there's a middle ground, right? There's either people who are pay it off early and get it done, or don't pay it off early and invest your money elsewhere. I want to put out a statement, right? Just because Jared is saying he doesn't want to pay it off right now doesn't mean he never wants to pay it off, right? And so I don't like to have extreme arguments. And a lot of people say, oh, well, if you're not going to pay it off, if you don't pay it off now, you're never going to pay it off. No, that's not true, right? You've chosen that, okay, if your interest rate is 4% and you can get 8% on average in the market, the mathematical sense is to go with the market return. And when you're younger, like you're only 34, your time horizon on that investment is much longer. So if you are 64 and your money's only going to be in there for 1 year, the risk level is so much higher than being 34 and your money is going to be in there for 30 plus years. So I want to point that out because that's a very conflicting argument that people like to use. And I just like to, ground it out by saying, look, right now I'm not focused on paying off my mortgage just like you, but I've already set the plan is once I have enough rental income and passive income through rentals, all of my income is going to go towards paying off mortgages, lowering that risk, and doing that. And so just because you're not choosing to pay it off now doesn't mean you're never going to pay it off.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that too, because no two journeys are the same, right? I mean, and people are people, and people have different dreams and aspirations, and sometimes that involves paying down the mortgage. And if that's true, then go for it. I've heard of some younger people that made the decision to pay off their home, and mathematically speaking, that's, on paper that maybe doesn't make sense, but to them it makes sense. And that was their goal and they hit it. And so those people I'm super proud of. And so, yeah, I'm so glad you pointed that out because that's so true.
Yeah, I had a guest on the podcast by the name of Tara. She was on episode 23 of the podcast. And one of her goals right now is to pay off one of her rental properties and move it on. And she was just explaining, just like you said, it doesn't make mathematical sense on paper. It is not the optimal path, but I don't think people understand the mental weight that is lifted off your shoulders owing no one money on your home. I think that is, nobody has ever felt that. Not many people have felt that before, so they don't understand what that journey means to some people.
Yeah. Right.
So how did you, I just want to know, because I talked about this on an episode, how did you weather the storm? Because you're self-managing your portfolio, and you said you really got into it December of 2019 going into 2020. How did you weather the storm of March of 2020, without a professional in your corner letting you know, like, hey, Jared, I know it looks bad, 7% drops multiple times a day. Because I know, listen, I was wrecked. Okay.
No, okay.
I was this close to the sell button because I also started investing in December of 2019 in a Roth IRA and stuff like that. So how did you weather that storm?
Man, so it was really difficult, just to be honest, because, and look, I'm not going to lie, if we were not in the situation that we were in, if we didn't pay off our debt, if we didn't have these emergency reserves, then I probably would have, just to be honest, because there were some tough times, and we were very fortunate to not lose our jobs. I've already talked about that, but just broadly, speaking about just other people. There were a lot of people that did tap out of their investments just because they had to. They were just trying to survive. But fortunately, we were in the position where we did not have to do that. And, I'd heard some things, Just do not, whatever you do, do not sell your investments. And during those times, it was, it was very tough. I never did really hover over the sell button or anything, but I just didn't look at it because, if you do look at it, you're going to get discouraged and you're going to think, what am I doing? And I know some people personally that did sell, and they're looking back now, and I don't know what they're thinking now, um, but they're obviously they've got a lot less money now than they did back then. But I tried to distract myself. There was a lot of other things going on at the time. A lot of, I was not doing the typical money Twitter thing, is to not watch the news. I was watching a lot of news back then just because nobody knew exactly what was going on. It was still really fresh. And but it was at that time too when I moved everything over into the Roth with Fidelity. It was at the very bottom of the market. It was like right when it hit that very bottom point and started going up. So, and I didn't time it like that. It was just the way it happened, and it has bounced back significantly since then. But and it's done pretty well. And now things are kind of rocky right now with what's going on. But yeah, and how I stayed the course, it was just sticking to. I was reading a lot of books at the time. I was reading. I wanted to mention too, another resource is Jim Collins, J.L. Collins' Simple Path to Wealth. That book absolutely changed my whole mindset when it comes to investing. And so I recommend to your listeners too, and I'm sure you've talked about that before already, but that's a phenomenal book. And I was reading that book at the time. And so, he's all about not selling, obviously. So that really helped me weather the storm too, was reading good books, investing books that preach to stay the course. And there's no better book, in my opinion, than that one to read during volatile times. I'm actually thinking about starting that book again and rereading it this here coming soon, just because of all the volatility we got going on. That's a great book to read to help you through that.
I 100% agree, man. I love the book. I read it, Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. I was actually listening to him on a podcast in March when this was all going down. Somebody brought him on. I think it was the Bigger Pockets Money podcast. He came on and he preached exactly what he talked about in that book. Stay the course. Do not sell. We've seen this, or not we, but he has seen this before. He has lived through it. So that's where you have to take those wise words. And people like Dave Ramsey, do not sell, stay the course. Like, unfortunately, there were people who needed to sell, but if you were one that did not need to sell, you really took a hard hit during that one. And of course, guys, I will link J.L. Collins' book, A Simple Path to Wealth, in the show notes below. You guys can pick it up. Phenomenal read. I want to say that's on my top five books of all time, finance books. So, Jared, you made a post a little while back that really hit home to my heart. And it was talking about how important it is for people to keep their 9 to 5 when they begin investing. Do you want to elaborate a little bit? Because especially real estate investing, and I'll talk about that to follow up, what you have to say. But a lot of people think like either I'm a teacher like your wife, or I'm an investor, or I work in the automotive industry, or I'm an investor, and I have to do that full time. What do you say to those people? Because you and I both know like that's not true at all.
Yeah. So the one thing that I like to tell people is that, when you work a 9 to 5, like probably, 98% of people out there, honestly, and I don't know the numbers, I just threw that out there, but you are obviously making money, right? Some people make more than others, obviously, but you have the opportunity to be an investor by opening up a regular brokerage account or IRA, and that's something that a lot of people don't even know that they can do while being an employee of a company. So, but it's all about changing your the way you spend money, because a lot of people counter it by saying, well, I don't make enough money to invest. Well, you probably don't, maybe, but maybe you can make a few lifestyle changes to make it to where you can start investing. And I like to talk about how inexpensive it is to start, just like all of those low fee, no minimum investments that you can make in index funds. You can start with $5. You can start with $10, with whatever you have. So I like to preach how easy it is to get started, because that gives people that maybe feel like they don't make enough hope to just start. Because I tell people, if you just start and you see the progress that you're making, you're going to be so excited, and you're going to want to put more into it. You're going to want to change the way you do things. You're going to want to change, maybe not go out and eat today and invest that money instead. Maybe instead of financing that $80,000 truck, you buy something a little less expensive and invest the rest. It's going to change your whole entire mindset. So that's why I like to say that. And also, 9 to 5 is most people, right? Not everybody's an entrepreneur. Not everybody is just a full-time investor. So that speaks to most people. So that's why I like to say that. And too, with a 9 to 5, you have that I hesitate to say sure income, because some people's incomes are variable, but you have that money coming in that you can most always rely on, as long as you do a good job at your 9 to 5, and you have the option to change around how you do things with that money. So that's why I like to appeal to the 9 to 5 crowd, just because it's what I do personally. I work a 9 to 5, and there's people out there that are way wealthier than me. There's a lot of people out there that make way more money than I do. But I just love sharing what I do, because what I do is nothing fancy. It's nothing out of the ordinary, but it's working for me. And we have a plan that's going to allow us to retire, decently comfortable when we get to retirement age. And it's nothing too fancy or nothing too over the top, because I'm not the smartest guy in the world. So I need something that's going to be sustainable, because simple is sustainable. And that's why I like to talk about that, honestly.
Yeah, I think a big portion of it, like, you need income to invest. Like, that is one of the requirements to invest.
Mm.
So why would you get rid of your mainstream of income to invest? It has never really made sense. And to relate it to real estate, I'm in a bunch of real estate groups, talking, giving advice, sharing ideas. And there's often times where somebody says, should I quit my job and get into real estate? Should I, cut my hours to get into real estate? And I'm always thinking, like, that is literally the worst thing you can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Without a job, you can't qualify for loans. Without a job, you have no stated income. So who's going to lend you money if you have no income, right? So it's like you are actually being counterproductive to investing by quitting your 9 to 5, so we call it. So I think it's something that's really important to talk about, because I don't even understand where that false premise comes from, for someone to think I need to quit my job and devote every moment of my life to do this, especially if it doesn't create an income instantaneously. So
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that talk on social media that makes people think that they need to do that. It sounds like you're in the real estate world, and that's awesome. I've thought about diving in a little bit myself, but a lot of people in that world, and I'm sure you can speak to this, but a lot of those people feel like you have to go 100% or nothing, and that's what you're talking about there. So I think it's trying to match that energy, I guess, is what people think is, okay, the best way to do this is to do what this social media influencer is doing. Well, no, they're at that point because they put in the work, they put in the years of work. And so that's why I feel like a lot of people feel like that they have to get rid of their 9 to 5. And let's face it too, there's a lot of people on Twitter that bash the 9 to 5 as something that if you're not thinking big enough, if you have a 9 to 5, there's a lot of people that put out that type of content that's just toxic, to be honest with you. If you have a 9 to 5, you're not ambitious enough. If you've got a 9 to 5, you're not thinking big enough. And a lot of these people that are younger and trying to get somewhere in life, they take that to heart. They go all in with it, and then they get burnt. So, and I feel like that's being very unrealistic. So, yeah, and why I like to talk about 9 to 5 is so important to keep, because, like you said, it's your main source of income. Why would you cut that off?
Yeah, and as soon as you started talking about that, one person really came to mind that I do want to mention because super duper intelligent man. He's taught me a lot. His book is on my top 5 also. Robert Kiyosaki. He's come
Hmm.
up. He wrote a book, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Awesome book. I'm gonna link Robert's book in the show notes. I'm giving y'all all of the good stuff because amazing book. But his message is very extreme against being an employee. His message is very extreme for spending your time building something for other people. And I get it. On the surface level, it is a very good message. I think everyone should be working to build something for themselves, but that doesn't mean spending your time, spending your skills, spending your resources to help someone else build something, be an employee for someone else is the end of the world. And a lot of times it ends up being a ladder to elevate you to be better. If you're working for someone and you're learning from them, they're teaching you, it's not just a one-sided thing. Now, of course, there are those jobs that, if you're a ditch digger, you're probably not going to be bumping elbows with the CEO of the company. But there are plenty of jobs out there where you can work for someone, you can offer them your skills, and in return be getting value that you can use to start your own business or start your own side hustle and stuff like that. But again, I love Robert Kiyosaki. I think he's awesome. He wrote a great book. A lot of his methods are very useful, but I just don't agree with everything he says, especially when it comes to that employee box that he talks about.
Yeah.
So, Jared, let's go ahead and transition into some of your short term goals that you hope to accomplish within the next year.
So right now, kind of the short-term goal we just wrapped up was buying our home. So we moved back to our original hometown that I mentioned a moment ago. And so we now have the home. Thank goodness. That was a little bit of a process. I don't recommend selling and buying a home at the same time. That's kind of stressful. But that's what we had to do. So that we can check off the list. We've got that done. And right now we're just bulk, like me personally, I'm just bulking up my brokerage account. I've one of the things that we invest $500 each month into the Roth, and then I'm just whatever we have left into the brokerage account. So I'm trying to bolster that up, and keep that up, because I plan on. I've been at my job for 11 years now, and when I retire, I'm not going to be at retirement age. I'm not going to be at 50, 59 and a half or whatever it is. So I'm trying to bolster up this brokerage account, just so when I get to that point that I can leave the company, I can have this pool of money to operate from that's not retirement in a source of retirement. So that's not really a short-term goal, but it's something that I'm kind of changing the way that I do my investing. And also too, I'm just living life right now. And so it's not really a goal per se, but I've got everything in place, and I'm just trying to enjoy life the best I can, because my kids are young right now. And they won't be like this forever. So, I realize that what I have now is precious, and I'm trying to just be present as much as possible and just take advantage of this as best I can, because, I'm going to look back. I don't want to look back and, regret not having spent as much time with them. So that's honestly what I'm focusing on right now, man. I've got all the processes in place for investing, and then I just live life. And that's what I like to speak about too on Twitter, is the fact that you can give 100% at your job, and you can set all these processes in place, and then you can live life too. Because a lot of people, I guess, have this misconception that you have to have one or the other, right? You either focus 100% on this or 100% on just being you in real life. But you can do both, and you can do really well with both. So that's really what I'm doing right now. Nothing anything fancy on this end. I'm not looking at any rental properties or anything. We've tossed around the idea of buying some land. We had 20 acres where we used to live at, and we really enjoyed it. So we've thought about buying some more, just as like some legacy stuff, something that we can pass down to the grandkids and the kids one day. So thinking about that, we do a lot of four-wheeler riding and hunting and that kind of stuff. So that's if there's one short-term goal, that's kind of what we're thinking about right now, is maybe buying some piece of property for the family to use.
That's awesome, man. And I love that you bring up that brokerage account being like your bridge to retirement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know once you lock your money up into a Roth IRA or a 401k, traditional IRA, things like that, you can't access that money penalty free until 59 and a half. Well, in your case, you want to retire well before that. So you need money, you need investments. That's what that brokerage account is for. Now, what are you losing by doing that? You're losing out on tax benefits, right? But at the same time, that's a very, very small price to pay for the gratitude of being able to retire early.
Yeah.
And I love that you brought up, enjoying the journey, right? A lot of people tend to think that you get the prize at the end of the journey when it comes to building wealth and retiring early and, creating generational wealth. But really, the journey is the prize. The people you meet throughout the journey, the things you can do for people throughout the journey, the inspiration you can provide while you're continuously building wealth, that is the real prize, at least to me. And I think that you should enjoy it. If you're giving up all of your luxuries, if you never eat out because you have to save every dime to get to this finish line, you're depriving yourself of the joy of building wealth. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and that's super important to me because, with our income, we don't make enough to where we can just be comfortable with investing only 15% and still have this huge amount of money to work with, right? I mean, we make decent money, but we still have to invest at least 25, and sometimes we do a little bit more than that. And we could take the money that we're spending on other things and invest it and get there sooner. But yeah, like you said, the destination is retirement, but the destination is also the life that you're living now. And that's super important because, like I said earlier, I don't want to look back and regret not spending time with my kids because I was grinding all day at a side hustle where honestly, I don't have to do that because, I just have my goal in mind. So yeah, it's super important to not lose focus of that. I see way too many people just grinding away, and meanwhile their families at home where they really don't have to do that. So it's kind of sad to see too, honestly.
Absolutely, you're right. It is sad to see. So, what are some of your long-term goals for your finances that you would hope to accomplish within the next 5 to 10 years? And what does that finish line actually look like for you?
Long-term goals. Yeah. So I don't plan on having the house paid off in 5 years, but that's one of the things that I plan on doing one day is working down, paying off our home. And, honestly, paying down our home is one of the key uh, benchmarks to making it to our retirement, because if I didn't have my home mortgage right now, I mean, that's the biggest expense that we have, and I'm sure it's like most people out there. When you don't have that, then you can really change the way things are going on in your life. You can take that job that's maybe a little less pay, which is kind of, in saying this, is kind of counterintuitive to what I mentioned earlier about making the choice to not pay down our mortgage, just because we're trying to build up our assets right now, but the mortgages, we've got a higher mortgage right now than what we did. So paying it off now is a pretty big hill to climb. So, but that's one day we're looking into that. We're going to have to buy a car here soon. So my wife's car is getting a little older, but it's not super old. It's a 2014 model. And so, when you go on this path of avoiding debt and being smart with your money, you kind of have to pre-plan some things. And a lot of people just go willy-nilly to a dealership and buy a car and don't really think much about it. But for us, we're starting to put a little bit back for that because we don't want to take on a huge auto loan. So we're thinking, which, used car prices are ridiculous right now. Just that whole side of things is crazy. So we're just shoving a little bit of money back just so when we do make the decision to buy, we'll have some decent amount of money to work with instead of just financing a whole car. So that's really one of our short-term goals. And then again, just continuing throwing in money into our brokerage accounts and our Roth IRAs. That's really nothing more than that. It's super simple and not very complex, but that's kind of the way we like it.
But slow and steady wins the race, man. Slow
That's
and
right.
steady wins the race. I just want to point out, we talked a lot about Dave Ramsey this episode. I really want to point something out. You say that your wife is a teacher. And I want to point out that they did a study for the listeners out there that don't know. Dave Ramsey and his team did a study where they interviewed over 10,000 millionaires, and they ranked the professions of those millionaires. And we all know teachers do not make a luxurious salary compared
That's
to
right.
most professions, but they were ranked number 3 on the all-time list of all the millionaires interviewed. So that just proves the point Jared is making is like, all you have to do is be consistent, get into a system, be consistent, and trust where you'll end up. So I just wanted to point that out because that was when I read that, and when I was just astonished that, and it just proved to me again that you don't need to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to become a millionaire, right? It's just a long-term play. You just have to be very consistent over a long period of time. Yeah. But with that being said, Jared, let's go ahead and jump into the final questions of the podcast. And I ask these same questions to every single guest I bring on. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Question number 1. Everyone has their own definition of what it means to have financial peace. What is your definition?
And I get this question sometimes. My definition of having financial peace is being able to do exactly what you want whenever you want. It's really just as simple as that. Because what's the opposite of that? And it's something simple, like if I wanted to go to the beach this summer, am I able to do that? To me, if you can do that without taking on debt, you are financially independent. Everybody has their own definition, but to me, that is the definition of it. Essentially, if you want to go buy this guitar, or whatever, I'm into music, so I use guitar as an example, but if you're able to do that without taking on debt, to me, that's financially independent. And also hitting your goals with investing. If you're able to do all of that at the same time, investing 25% of your income, whatever your goals are, and do things like that, you are financially independent. And I know some people would probably disagree with that, but that's always been my definition of it, because if you're able to do all of those things, invest and be diligent with your money while also living life, that to me, that's financial independence.
Yeah, I love it, man. I don't disagree with it at all. I mean, having the time to do whatever you want to, I don't disagree with that at all. Question number 2. If there are listeners out there that want to start building debt, I'm sorry, let me start that all over. If there are listeners out there that want to start building wealth and have no clue where to get started, what would you tell them?
So the number one thing that I would tell them is to look at your situation right now with debt. If you have a lot of debt, I would recommend that you pay all of that off. And I say that just because that's what we did. If you have credit cards or a car loan or anything like that, I would pay that off first, and then I would just simply open up a brokerage account through like Fidelity or Vanguard or something like that, and just start putting in $100 a month. Until you start building that habit, and then you can start ramping that up to 200, 300, 400, and whatever you're comfortable with. And I know a lot of people's situation is different with student loans, or maybe some very high numbers of debt that may not be super easy to destroy in maybe a matter of 2 years or 3 years. But that's the number one thing that I would tell them, because when you have debt, it's hard to invest to your full potential because you've got all this money going out to debts and stuff. And quite honestly, if you're not going to see a lot of progress starting off, you're not going to be able to sustain it. So pay off the debt, get all that money that you used to pay toward debt payments and turn them into wealth payments, is what I like to say. And so it just makes it so much easier to do that when you don't have debt.
I love it, man. Your biggest wealth building tool is your income.
Your income.
So
yep.
When your income is going out to everyone else instead of your bank account, it's absolutely counterintuitive. I love that, man. Question number 3. If there's one thing you could advise everyone to avoid doing to start building wealth, what would it be?
So we hear a lot about crypto right now, and NFTs and all of these, what I call shiny objects right now, especially with younger people. They're seeing all the meme stocks. They're seeing all of these things where people are making a lot of money doing it. Personally, if that's your first investment, I would advise to not do that. Just because these are very unproven things. I mean, they're still very new, and there's a lot of people that are making a lot of money with them, but they're taking on a lot of risk. And quite honestly, a lot of them are getting lucky. There's people that study this stuff day in and day out, and they know it like the back of their hand. And I'm not saying that you can't do well with them, but especially if you're just starting off, I would avoid that for sure, because you're just chasing this shiny object. You're chasing the results that someone else is getting, and they may be getting those results because they study it all the time. But if you're new, you're just new to this whole entire world. I mean, you don't even know what a Roth is, for an example. I mean, so just the basic stuff you need to get down first before going off into this world of cryptocurrency and NFTs and all these other things. So that's what I would say to avoid, because I see that a lot as I get DMs from people asking about what about this coin, or what about this, and I'll say, look, we'll pump the brakes. We need to focus on this first before we go into that. So they just, and I get it. I see they're seeing all these people making all this money, and they want to do it too. But we got to focus on the basics first before we go off and do things like that.
And we need to focus on the proven path to wealth, not just the theoretical path.
Right. Yeah, and it's not fancy, and it's not exciting, and that's what the people are looking for, is the fast wealth. But there's no such thing as fast wealth to me. And there's some people that do it, but it's a very, very, very small percentage of the overall world. So yeah, we need to avoid that altogether.
We need to play the probability and not the possibility.
That's
is
right.
possible that people can get rich buying crypto, selling NFTs and stuff like that, but the probability of it happening is very, very, very low.
That's right.
So, 4th question, Jared. If there's someone out there that doesn't believe they can reach financial peace due to their age, race, religion, sexual orientation, etc., what would you say to change their mind?
Well, I know a lot of people, money is a very personal thing. And to me, there's nothing more personal than money, because all of the personal things in life require money. I mean, let's just be honest. And people have different upbringings. People have different struggles. People have different things that have completely changed their life around money, either the lack of it or things like that. The one thing that I would say is you need to understand where you came from. Okay. And you can't change where you came from, but you can change where you end up. And it's just all in your head. Uh, and I'm not saying that your struggles is just all in your head, but what I am saying is that it's up to you whether or not you stay where you started. You can make a change, but it's up to you to get past that. And it may take you a while. It may take you years. It may take you however long it takes. But ultimately, the decision is yours whether or not you get out of where you started. And so that's it. And going back to my example, I could have stayed in my debt. Um, and just continue living in that victim mentality that I was around my whole life, but I decided to go a different course. So, and sometimes it's harder than others. Some people will go through a little bit of more of a struggle to get beyond that point, but it's possible. And it's never been more possible for people to build wealth than it is today. It's more readily available than it has ever been today, and it doesn't require as much money to get started. So that's one thing I would say. Don't look back at where you started at. Always look to what you can be, because it's up to you ultimately.
You know what? I love you said that, because yesterday I had shared a post on Facebook. It was a post that said, some of us are building from scratch, no inheritance and no connections. And I just shared it and I said, so what have you been able to build from scratch? Like, if you started from nothing and still have nothing, then you're the problem. Right. And so it's always, we can acknowledge the issues that we have, we can acknowledge the boundaries we have, whatever they may be, but I will never allow someone to use their boundaries as an excuse on why they can't do it. And because it at the end of the day, that's what it is to me. It's just an excuse. We can acknowledge it. We can find a way around it, but we're never going to sit there and let that boundary say, I cannot do it because of this, because it's not true.
That's right. Yeah, and I don't want to discount what people have maybe went through in their past or what they're going through now, but sometimes you just have to make some changes that maybe are uncomfortable sometimes, but ultimately it's worth it if it's changing where you're at right now or some circumstances you're in order to set you up for the success of building wealth. And those decisions that you have to make, although they may be difficult, but it's necessary to get you out of wherever you're at to help you start building wealth. The wealth side, that's not changed. You can still do it. Maybe you have to change your circumstances where you're at. Maybe you have to change your job. Maybe you have to change some people around you or something like that. But the process of building wealth hasn't changed. You may have to change your circumstances. That's, to me, is the biggest thing.
And you have to be willing to change. As soon as you say, I'm not going to change this, that's a choice you made.
That's right. So, yeah.
I mean, I love this conversation, Jared. It has been so amazing. Can you tell the listeners where they can find out more about you?
Yeah, so I'm mostly on Twitter. It's at MoneyJrod. And so that's kind of backwards of what I actually go on there. It's at MoneyJrod instead of at JRod Money. I had to go a little backwards on that. So that's where you can mostly find me out. I've got a website, jrodmoney.com. And there you can sign up for my email subscription there, and I send out a newsletter. I've not done it here in a little while. I plan on getting that started back up here soon. But yeah, that's where you can mostly find me. I just hang out in the Twitter world.
Gotcha. And of course, guys, I'm going to link his website and his Twitter in the show notes below, so you don't have to go too far to find it. Jared, I really, really, really appreciate you coming on today, man. The conversation has been absolutely amazing, man.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed it too. I always love doing these podcasts, and so I look forward to going back and listening to it.
Absolutely. And I enjoy having you back on in the future to see what kind of progress you've made on the things we've talked about, man.
Yeah, I'm anytime, man. Sounds good.
All right, man. You have a blessed rest of your day.
All right, you too. Thanks.
Man, oh man, I really hope you guys got a lot of value out of me and Jared's conversation. As I said before the interview, guys, he's not doing anything special, right? He's dumping money into the market. He's trusting that over 20, 30, 40, 50-year spans of investing, the market has never had a negative 30-year span. Okay. So as long as you're in it for the long term, if we look back at what the market has done, we can't predict what it's going to do in the future, but we have a pretty good idea, right? You look at history and hope that in some ways, it just continues to do the snowball that it has. He mentioned so many different tools like Dave Ramsey, which I talk about almost every podcast episode. So of course he's going to be linked in the show notes. He talks about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'll have a link to that book if you want to start learning about real estate. JL Collins, A Simple Path to Wealth, guys. If you just want to be super passive, put your money in index funds, such a easy to follow along book. And of course, he mentioned the Money Guy Show, and I will link that in the show notes. But I really hope you guys take some of these resources and go with them, because these things have changed my life. It put me on the track that I am on now. And this is why I'm going to become a millionaire, and nobody can tell me otherwise. But with that being said, guys, of course, I do offer financial coaching that you can schedule a free 30-minute consultation down in the show notes below. Click on my Calendly link and schedule that 30-minute free consultation. And if you want to go from there, we can. But also, guys, whatever you're listening on, whether it's Facebook, Apple Music, Google Podcast, Spotify, whatever you're listening on, make sure you guys leave a review on the podcast. It really helps me reach such a broader audience. If you guys haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, you can make sure to subscribe in the show notes below. I have that link down there, and follow us on all social medias. If you guys don't understand something that we talk about on the show, do not be afraid to reach out. I answer all of the messages personally. So if you message that account, you're going to be messaging me personally. But I'm going to get up out of here, guys. I'm your host, James Bowman. And always remember, you're only secure as your ability to perform. So spend your life accumulating assets that can perform for you. Later, guys.